Global leadership. Do you have the right mindset to thrive in cross-cultural settings? We'll help you right here on The Leadership Voice. Welcome to The Leadership Voice. I'm your host, Jay Barbuto. This show features insights and advice around everything related to leadership and leadership development. Today's show is all about leadership in global settings. So we have two executives joining us today, each of whom have thrived in global environments. The Leadership Voice welcomes Richard Ramsey, Vice President from Walt Disney International, and Beth Wheat, Vice President of Global Projects from Experian Services. We also have with us Professor Jay Barbuto with today's leadership lesson. Let's get things started with our quote of the day. Today's quote comes from American activist and labor organizer and founder of the National Farm Workers Association, Cesar Chavez. Preservation of one's own culture does not require contempt or disrespect for other cultures. Our first guest today on The Leadership Voice is Mr. Richard Ramsey, who is currently Vice President of Human Resources at Walt Disney International. A 37-year Disney veteran, currently is responsible for leading a global futures team engaged in strategic foresight work across 45 countries, as well as innovation and collaboration initiatives. He first joined the company within the operations division at Disneyland and has since contributed to the success of the business operation through a variety of human resources positions within the parks and resorts, feature animation, studio distribution, and international businesses. He is also active at Cal State Fullerton, serving the Center for Leadership on its Board of Directors and Board of Advisors since 2011. It is with great pleasure that we at The Leadership Voice welcome a great leader and a wonderful person, Mr. Richard Ramsey.
Thanks, Jay. It's great to be here.
Richard, it's so good to have you here on The Leadership Voice. In the very earliest discussions about The Leadership Voice, back in the very beginning, our viewers don't know this, but you and I were having conversations about this television show before we ever actually started. And one of the topics we said we wanted to do was something on global leadership. And so it's really great to have you on this show because even then we knew we wanted you to represent this theme when that time came. So welcome.
Thanks, Jay. It's great to be here.
Richard, let's jump right in.
Sure.
So please tell us about your career trajectory and especially how your role at Disney evolved to global types of roles.
Sure. Well, as you noted in the introduction, I've had the good fortune of working my entire adult life at Disney.
Amazing.
I started as an undergraduate selling merchandise on Main Street at Disneyland, and now I'm working internationally with Disney in the division that manages our businesses outside of the U.S. But I've had a lot of experiences in human resources, some of which have taken me abroad. My first international experience was helping to open up Disneyland Paris. 25 years ago, we just celebrated the anniversary last year.
When it opened, it wasn't called Disneyland Paris, right?
Right, it was called Euro Disney. Good fun fact, Jay.
Yes, it's a fun fact. And so you opened Euro Disney.
Yes.
And that means you had to staff it.
Yes.
How many people?
I think we hired about 14,000 people in 14 weeks while I was there, literally from all across Europe.
Incredible, incredible. So as you think about some of your experiences, what was the biggest challenge that you had to overcome during any global project that you've worked on?
Sure. Well, my first truly full-time international experience was as the head of human resources for Disney in Latin America. And I got started on a project shortly after that, building a strategic foresight skill set across our organization. So over the last 4 years, we've trained about 500 people in this new strategy process. We've built 12 futures teams around the world. And I think the big challenge there, I would say, were three things: geography, culture, and resources. geography, because we've got people across 12 different countries, or actually more than that, probably about 20 different countries doing this work. So trying to communicate with them, get them all moving in the same direction is often challenging because of time zones and travel. The other thing is culture. It's so important when you're starting a project to establish trust. That's hard to do over the telephone, so I normally make a practice of going into the markets when I'm starting up a project to get to know the people that I'm working with. Mm-hmm. And then finally, resources. This is a challenge that many companies have. The people who are doing this new skill that we're teaching them also have other responsibilities, so trying to manage responsibilities and deadlines across all of these teams has proved challenging, but we've been able to do it.
So it sounds like you've really had to change or really focus whenever you're going into global settings and essentially have the right mindset for global projects. Have you always had the right mindset for global projects, or is this something that you've developed over time?
Well, I think some things I've come into this role with, or the roles that I've had, and then others I've learned while I've been working. I took cross-cultural communication and cross-cultural anthropology courses when I was an undergraduate, which taught me to carefully consider the context and the dynamics of the people that you're working with and not assume that everybody thinks the same way you do. And that's been immensely helpful. I've also studied foreign languages. When I was in Argentina, I learned Spanish so that I could communicate better with my team. And I've always tried to learn something about the country that I'm working in so that I can understand and appreciate not only their culture, but their history, their art, so they can get a sense that I'm interested in them and their country and their culture as much as I'm interested in the project.
Oh, that's terrific. So what did you need to learn most in order to thrive in global settings?
I think be prepared to unlearn some things. Mm-hmm. I think when you work for a large U.S.-based company, it's easy to assume that you can lift products and services or programs and just export them as is into another market. Sometimes that works, but frequently it doesn't. So stopping first and kind of unlearning what you think you know, and have the patience to understand the differences in the markets that you're operating in, and then adjust accordingly. And I think constantly reevaluating how you're doing, asking a lot of questions along the way will hopefully ensure that your products and services are culturally and locally relevant and ultimately more successful.
Now, it sounds like you have a great outlook and great perspective on how to operate in a cross-cultural environment. So a lot of people might undertake a global project moving forward. The world is becoming more and more global. So what advice would you give somebody that might be taking on a global project for the first time?
I think be patient. One of the first things that I did when I went to Argentina and I was having my first meetings with everyone, I had the urge just to jump right into talking about projects or business. Mm-hmm. But I took the time to get to know them personally. And I found that I was able to establish trust more quickly that way. And in the long run, although I didn't get to my project conversations as quickly as I would here in the US, ultimately I think I was more successful because I took the time to do it a different way. So I think being patient, understanding that people work differently and paying attention to that. Oftentimes when I've been on calls with some of our teams outside of the U.S. and I've asked a question for feedback, because there's a large group, people don't speak up. So I've had to have individual calls and meetings with those people at a later time to really uncover how they were truly feeling and thinking about things. But if you operate just like you do here in the U.S., you might miss those things and I think be less effective.
And so In essence, what you've described, and we'll be talking about this later in the show as well, is you've described this notion of cultural intelligence, is that you have developed and evolved, and really, over time, you've become more and more culturally intelligent. So hats off to you.
Well,
and
I hope so.
Mr. Ramsey, Richard, it is such a pleasure to have had you on the show today. I want to thank you for coming on and joining us, sharing your wisdom about working in global settings and in global projects with our Leadership Voice audience. So, Mr. Ramsey, thank you so much for being on the show.
Thanks, Jay. It's great to be here.
And now it's time for a featured segment of the Leadership Voice. It's today's Did You Know? Ethnocentrism is a belief that one's own culture is the best in every way. Cultural relativism, by contrast, is a belief that every culture is equally valid, so you have no right to impose your cultural values on other cultures. While some tend to operate more towards ethnocentrism and others more towards cultural relativism, most people dwell between these two extremes. It's this ethnocentric belief that prevents many of us from developing cultural intelligence. That was from Quora.com. It's now time for our Leadership Countdown, where we give you, our viewers, a list that can guide your quest for excellence. Today, the Leadership Voice brings you the top 10 most diverse cities in the world, as reported by top10s.com. Let's begin with number 10, Brussels, Belgium. Number 9 is Montreal, Canada. The number 8 most diverse city in the world is Sydney, Australia. At number 7, we find Chicago, Illinois. Number 6 is no other than Paris, France. Number 5 is Moscow, Russia. Then we have at number 4, for the most culturally diverse cities in the world, it's Los Angeles, California. Number 3 is London, England. At number 2, we have Toronto, Canada. And the number 1 most culturally diverse city in the world is New York, New York. And that, viewers, has been your Leadership Countdown, as we have explored the 10 most culturally diverse cities in the world. Up next on the Leadership Voice, we will have Beth Wheat in the studio, so stick around, and we'll be right back after this commercial break.
Well, we found here at Honda Center and the Anaheim Ducks that the Center for Leadership brings expertise in doing research, in doing training. The faculty that has come and given the training to our employees does all the research themselves. They're not pulling this information off the shelf. They're out there researching themselves, talking from firsthand experience, and it brings such a level of competency that we, again, don't find from other trainers that are on the market.
Well, simply put, is what really differentiates and distinguishes Fullerton and the Center for Leadership really is your expertise. You guys are able to create customized content for our business based on true research.
The faculty from Cal State Fullerton, obviously they're professors of their field. They have deep knowledge and research, but also, aside from the theory, they really bring in some practical examples, and they bring in a lot of interactive activities.
The Bringing Learning to Work initiative is our way of meeting the needs of Orange County businesses and communities. When our clients ask the Center for Leadership to come to bring learning to work, the clients know that they're getting cutting-edge information, the latest thinking in the field, but they're also getting world-class training. Welcome back to the Leadership Voice. Our second guest, Beth Wheat, currently serves as Vice President of IT Transformation and Engagement at Experian. She is responsible for leading a number of transformational global programs in support of Experian's IT strategy and change management. Ms. Wheat joined Experian as a director within the Global Program Management Office and was promoted to head of Global Program Management 3 years later. She has overseen many global projects at Experian, where she designed and delivered a globally adopted recognition program, an IT career architecture, and optimized and refocused the communications function to assist with change management and stakeholder engagement across the enterprise. It is with great pleasure that we at the Leadership Voice welcome a great person and an accomplished global project leader, Beth Wheat.
Hi, Jay. Thank you for having me today.
Beth, it's great to have you on the show. You know, a long time ago when we were first talking conceptually about doing a global project theme for the Leadership Voice, we thought of you way back when we were brainstorming potential guests. And so we're so glad that you're able to be here today to join us on the Leadership Voice.
Oh, that's very nice. I'm very happy to be here.
Well, terrific. Well, why don't we go ahead and jump right in. Our viewers at home, or wherever they may be when they watch this, are very interested in hearing what you've learned and what you might be able to share and offer to them related to working in global environments. So could you tell us about your career trajectory and especially how your career took you into global roles?
The global space, sure. Honestly, I was thinking about that question, and I really think it was inevitable. So I've spent most of my professional career in the corporate space. I did have some detours into a nonprofit world and education, but in coming back to the corporate world after some time away, and with the prevalence of globalization, it's really, I think, would be very uncommon to work almost anywhere where you wouldn't have at least some exposure or some opportunity to work in a global capacity. And I'm excited about that. I love it. It's one of the things that attracted me to Experian. And I also think it's a really important way that we're helping to evolve the world. Commerce and trade has, throughout history, brought people together and helped us see our commonalities. I think globalization has that same potential. And I hope people will be very happy to be a part of it. The world is increasingly a smaller place, and there's really no turning back from that. So let's do it right.
No, that's true. That's really true. So tell us about some of the global projects that you've worked on at Experian.
Sure. When I joined 6 years or so ago, I was brought in to work on a cultural program to embed the voice of the customer in a business that was global. And that was a great entry into the global way of working, because it may seem, you know, from my perspective, it was pretty self-evident the things we needed to do. But that's not the case, because there are different perspectives and different interpretations of what is good service around the globe. And so great learning on that particular project. When I was leading the global PMO, I actually had oversight of all of our global portfolio, which was fascinating and diverse. Everything from acquisitions to divestitures to big IT projects, cultural projects. And we also put together global project management standards. So we pulled together a global team of PMO leaders around the business in different parts of the world. And here again, thinking that project management in itself is a very standards-based profession, you might expect that that would be a pretty easy task, but there are many different nuances to it and ways of thinking about it in different regions of the world. So that was a challenge too, which was great. And then of course the things that you mentioned at the outset, the global recognition program for our employee recognition was a great one culturally, and the IT career architecture is the most recent delivery I'm very excited about.
So as you think about some of the global projects you've worked on, and you've worked in global settings quite a bit.
Yep.
Tell me, what are maybe some of the biggest challenge, what is the biggest challenge? Hands down, what is the biggest challenge you've had to overcome?
Well, this is going to really show my program management colors, but I would say getting agreement on requirements, which is the biggest challenge for most projects, but when you're working globally, even more so. If you bring 5 people into a room and tell them the objective is to remodel a kitchen, you'll have right away 5 different visualizations from those people for what that kitchen should look like. Some things will be the same. There'll probably be a refrigerator and a stove. But if you're working with people from all over the world, there'll be voltage differences. There'll be just different aesthetics. And so as a leader of global projects, you and if you're seeking a global solution, you have to make sure that all of those perspectives and needs and requirements are expressed and articulated very clearly. The big projects that I've come into globally that have gotten into trouble have been because we did not communicate fully at the outset.
So tell us, Beth, how is it that you You've worked in global settings, you've succeeded in global settings. So how have you developed the right mindset for working in global kinds of projects?
Well, first of all, I think it's a work in progress. And I'm learning every day, which is part of what I love. But I think I had a little advantage when I came back into the corporate world. I had been in education, and my master's degree is actually in cross-cultural education and curriculum development. So in that learning, what my biggest takeaway was that the cultural and language differences are not, they're far more than superficial. They actually influence cognitive process. So your culture and your language will influence the way you intake information and the way you problem solve. And this is where you hear a lot about the strength of the diversity in teams. And so when people bring a different way of thinking to a project, it can either be very frustrating, or if you unlock the value of it, it really will lead to the best solution. So I feel like I had an advantage knowing that going in, and knowing that the goal wasn't for this project to go the way I think it should go. I sat in on a big global kickoff call once upon a time with someone who opened the call by saying, "Hi everyone, my name is so-and-so, and listen, I'm an American, and I just tell things like it is, and so as we work on this project, I don't mean any disrespect, but you know, this is just who I am, so you know, let's just get on with it." So
get ready for me to be offensive and coarse
kind of.
and inappropriate at many times.
It didn't go well. You know, and so because people can't, even if they want to, even if they really, you know, wouldn't be offended by that and they want to give it a try, people come to the table with their own perspectives and background, and we have to meet them there. And you know, sometimes I feel like I do that well, and then there are other times when I'm just trying to figure it out, because every person and every project is different. But I love it, and I genuinely want to connect. And I think that's really what makes the difference. Yeah,
and the story you described, it really speaks to the notion of adapting our own behavior to the cultural norms of wherever it is that we're trying to interface with.
Absolutely, and you don't lose yourself. You don't become inauthentic. You're just open. There's just an openness and a curiosity, and if you have that and you reach out to people, you'll get results.
Yeah, that's great. Maybe we should kind of leave our viewers with some final thoughts. So if we were to come across somebody that is going to undertake a global project for the first time, what advice would you give somebody that's about to embark on a global project for the first time in their career?
I would encourage them to become educated on that culture or the cultures that they'll be working with, and by that I don't mean the food and the traditional garb and you know, the national song, although it's good to know all of those things. But there are some great tools available. Experian uses Cultural Navigator, which is a web-based tool. I'm sure there are many great ones out there, but it allows you to learn about some of the things that I was mentioning, the cognitive process differences, some of the social differences that you should be aware of, just to manage your own expectations, so that if you get on a call and someone is 10 minutes late, you're not offended. Depending on their cultural background, that might not be rude, that might actually be exceedingly punctual. So you have to be sure that you're aware of those things. Some of the tools will allow you to even input the different countries or cultures that you'll be working with and show you the intersections between a number of them and where your flashpoints might be. So that is invaluable. But I would also caution against then using it to stereotype. So if you learn that a certain culture is known to be very hierarchical, for example, and they won't make decisions without flying it all the way up the leadership chain, know that going in, but don't assume that about the person that you're working with, because they may have diverse background. They may have already worked on projects that are more global in nature, and they've figured out a way around that. So, so don't allow that information to make you look for problems that might not actually be there. So there's a little nuance. Yeah. We all want to be understood, but no one wants to be stereotyped.
So we want to understand the potential tendencies, but we don't want to become locked into those tendencies.
Exactly.
So
or
that they form
judgmental.
biases.
Exactly. Right. Yes.
Well, terrific. I think that we have given our viewers some great things to think about, and we want to really thank you, Beth, for coming on the show today and sharing your wisdom about global projects, and also about your wisdom in how to really function and operate and succeed in cross-cultural environments. So, Beth, I want to thank you for being on the show.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Jay.
Thank you so much.
It's been great.
Yeah. Did you hear that?
I think so.
Well, that means it's time for today's leadership lesson, which poses a bit of a problem, because this is usually when I introduce today's professor who will be giving our leadership lesson. But today, I'm giving the leadership lesson, and I can't very well introduce myself.
No.
Would you help us out here?
I would love to help you out. All right, it's time for today's leadership lesson. Are you ready to learn? Albert Einstein once said, if you can't explain it simply, then you don't understand it well enough. Joining us today on the Leadership Voice is Professor Jay Barbuto. I think you're going to like him. I do. He might even remind you of your host. Dr. Barbuto is joining us to share the 4 mindsets of global leadership.
Hi, I'm Jay Barbuto, and here is today's leadership lesson. Today I'll be talking about the 4 mindsets of global leaders, and will especially point out the most optimal for global settings. There are 2 characteristics that go into every person's capacity to engage in global projects: cultural intelligence and global business acumen. First, I'll talk about cultural intelligence. Cultural intelligence describes the ability to understand and adapt to a new culture, and over time, internalize that culture. The most culturally intelligent leaders will learn about new places before they visit, and they will find opportunities to experience the culture of a region while they are there. Global business acumen is the equivalent of having a great international business mind. Understanding business markets and consumer demands, as well as knowing regions that have similar adoption patterns, helps leaders to identify business opportunities for global expansion. If we imagine a leader being high or low in each of these 2 areas, we can create a typology of 4 combinations of cultural mindsets. So, if a person is low in both cultural intelligence and global business acumen, not a good combination, this would make a person have a provincial mindset. A person with a provincial mindset doesn't think in terms of expanded markets abroad and is not typically culturally sensitive. If a person is low in cultural intelligence but low in global business acumen, then this person has an international mindset. Now, an international mindset, a person with an international mindset will actively seek and find global expansion opportunities, but they may struggle with the cultural nuances required to implement that expansion. It would be absolutely necessary to have both in a global market. Now, if a person is high in cultural intelligence but low in global business acumen, then this person has an intranational mindset. This person will blend and acclimate well to other cultures, but may lack the business acumen to identify opportunities and emerging markets, and likely won't leverage company strengths as would be necessary for a global leader. Now, the best combination is if a person is high in cultural intelligence and also high in global business acumen. This would represent a person with a global mindset. A person with a global mindset has both the strong business acumen to recognize opportunities for expansion and scaling, combined with the cultural competence needed for cross-cultural implementation. My recommendation to each of you is to work hard to develop your global business acumen and your cultural intelligence so that you can develop into a true global leader, one with a global mindset. I'm Jay Barbuto, and this has been today's leadership lesson. Thank you, Professor Barbuto, for your leadership insights for developing a global mindset. It's now time for the Leadership Voice's Leadership Example. Today, the Leadership Voice recognizes 8 global companies that have excelled in diversity and inclusion, as reported by DiversityInc.com. It's now time for the Leadership Voices Q&A. Do you need some leadership advice? Well, you've come to the right place. Every show we take questions from you, our viewers, and answer them right here on the show. Today we have 3 great questions, so let's get to our Q&A. Our first question comes to us from Anna from Corona, California. She asks, what is the first step towards developing cultural intelligence? This is a good question because every developmental journey has its beginning, and developing cultural intelligence requires us to eliminate ethnocentric tendencies. Ethnocentrism is the belief that our own culture and background is the very best in the world, that nothing compares to what we grew up with and to which we are accustomed. This kind of thinking prevents us from appreciating the nuances and beauty of other cultures and prevents us from adapting to other cultures. Until we can start appreciating other cultural norms and eventually start following them, our ability to develop cultural intelligence will be hampered. So the first step toward developing cultural intelligence is to get past our ethnocentric tendencies. Our second question comes from Rajan in La Habra, California. He asks, what is the best way to develop cultural intelligence? It sounds like it will take a long time. Are there business trips and expatriate assignments the only real answers? That's a great question. You know, research testing the predictors of cultural intelligence has studied the role of shorter trips on such development. You know, it's long been assumed that longer trips like expatriate and international assignments are the only way to develop cultural intelligence. Shorter trips, like business trips and pleasure travel, have long been assumed to be ineffective for cultural intelligence development. Recent research has shown that these shorter international travel experiences can lead to cultural intelligence, but this occurs best when travelers immerse themselves in the native culture during such travel. So get out of the hotel, get out of the office when you're on a business trip. Go to a street fair, a cultural festival, a special celebration, out on the town, and experience the culture as if you lived there. Because this cultural immersion is most closely related to cultural intelligence development while on business and tourist trips. Our third question comes from Stacy in Laguna Hills. She asks, what is the biggest roadblock to operating in global settings? This is a good question. You know, there are many potential roadblocks that can hamper our ability to do any project. But in global settings, there are specific challenges that must be overcome to operate effectively. The biggest roadblock to operating in global settings is the tendency to expect others to meet our expectations, rather than working hard to meet their expectations. You've heard the expression, when in Rome, do as the Romans do? Well, from a cultural standpoint, this is actually very good advice for social and business success. Rather than fighting the culture, embrace it. Learn about the culture and behave consistently with it. And you will find yourself operating much more effectively in global settings. And eventually, you will start to display more and more global competence. This has been the Leadership Voices Q&A. If you have a question or need advice, having leadership challenges at work and need some expertise and insights, send us your questions right here to the Leadership Voice by email, leadershipvoice@fullerton.edu, or contact us at Twitter, @CSUF_leadership. Well, I think that's all the time we have for today's show. Today we explored leadership in global settings and learned from 2 accomplished global leaders. Thank you to Mr. Richard Ramsey from Walt Disney International and Ms. Beth Wheat from Experian Services. Thank you also to our exceedingly insightful leadership lesson delivered by yours truly. Join us each episode of the Leadership Voice as we will have 2 more executive guests, plus another special leadership lesson, and lots more worth tuning in to see. I'm Jay Barbuto, and on behalf of the Center for Leadership and Mahalo College of Business and Economics, we'll see you right here next time on the Leadership Voice.